So welcome to Cerulean Arts Gallery, the tour and talk for the current collective exhibition, which features work by Lydia Hamilton Brown, Lisa Hamilton, Frederic Kaplan, Michael Kowbuz, and Allison Syvertsen. So the exhibition is on view through January 9th. We are currently open by appointment through January 5th. But after that, you can come and visit Wednesday through Friday, 10 to 6, Saturday, Sunday, 12 to 6. And everything is also available on the website. So I'm going to put a link to it in the chat for you, so you can check it out there. And you can also make purchases online, which is convenient. So let's see, we are recording this talk, so we'll edit it and put it on YouTube after the fact if you want to see it again, or if there's someone you know who didn't see it. So what we're going to do is proceed through the exhibitions, visit each artist's gallery, and they'll give a short talk about themselves, their work. And if you have questions as we go, you could put them in the chat to me, and I'll field them for you, or you could save them to the end. So, all right, so that's all the business. So we'll get started. So I'm going to shift to spotlight Tina's view as she makes her way down the aisle. And the first artist we're going to visit is Allison Sirensen. Allison, hello.
Okay. Well, my show focused on still life as subject matter, specifically like cakes and bakery items. And I was using them really as a way to explore color and form and to express ideas, and sometimes to talk about different life circumstances. This wall that Tina's focusing on now shows two of the media that I was using: oil painting, which is this one, and silver point. I've been primarily working gouache, which is opaque watercolor, for years, but I was trying to branch out a little bit for this show. So I explored oil a little bit. The silver point was interesting to explore. Because really drawing is the foundation of all my work, but I rarely exhibit drawings. So silver point was a way of sort of elevating my drawings a little bit. Basically, silver point predates graphite. So you're literally drawing with a piece of silver and a stylus. And so something about drawing with that precious metal, it seems to make the drawings themselves more precious. So I was going from that angle. And here's one of the oil paintings. My oil paintings tended to be more group formations than some of the gouache paintings you'll see. This one I was having a tricky time with because I was having trouble deciding what the painting was about. It just felt like sort of oddly, tightly clustered. It was only then maybe I should be leaning more into that than fighting it, because to me it looked like a little family portrait. So I ended up calling the piece Family. This wall has some of my gouache and my oil paintings. This gouache was called Spirit, where I was trying to play off the effect of the light catching on the cupcake wrapper and the reflection of the wrapper against the dark background kind of gave it a ghostly effect. So that was an example of just reacting to the subject matter and trying to pull an idea from it. This next one is another oil painting. Again, another clustered formation. I called this one Kickstand because, again, I couldn't figure out what it was about until I put that little triangular crumb at the bottom. It looked like a little bike kickstand, and the whole formation seemed to be leaning against it. The oil paintings are a little tricky to film because they're very textured and they have a little bit of a sheen on it. they're similar to my gouache in terms of how I'm thinking about the subject matter, but the oil has a very different feel and a very different textural effect. Here is one of my silver point drawings called Helix. The silver point drawings, I should say, they all look pretty pale and delicate now. Silver point is an interesting material to work with because since you're drawing with silver, it tarnishes over time. So these drawings will actually get darker and richer over time, which is kind of a nice feature because of just be able to think of something that ages well or gets better the longer it's around. So it's an interesting process. And this is another gouache piece. This was actually a painting of a little triple chocolate cake that I made as a way of coping with the 2020 election evening, to cope with the stress and nervousness. But I was trying to basically paint this object that's all shades of brown by not painting it brown. So I was painting with a red filter on the subject and a blue reflected background. So it kind of distorts the colors in an interesting way. And moving on, this is a wall of gouache, mostly gouache and a silver point drawing here. The gouache paintings were fun to work with. I actually went to the oil paintings and I went back to the gouache, and I felt it was very freeing to return to the gouache after the very labor intensive oils. This one was called Big Celebration. It was a piece of what they call a celebration or a confetti cake, but it was actually at a time when I was experiencing something big happening in my life. So I was painting this cake slice is looking very large within the frame, so look very monumental, and I have it sort of offset, so it appears to be sort of moving forward to have a more optimistic feel. And this is sort of the flip side of the coin. This one is called Pity Party. It's the same type of cake. I was trying to play with using a more multicolored background that's similar to the colors within the cake, but also dealing with a difficult light circumstance. So I was painting this sort of party theme sort of ironically around this cake slice. I was purposely laying down, I was actually trying to mimic the posture of a dead animal to make it look a little bit more dejected. But I was just playing with the idea of color and form, but then also with this underlying idea of this backdrop of what was going on in my life at the same time. It's another silver point drawing. The silver point's interesting too because you can work on a toned ground because you have to prepare the paper. So this was a slightly darker gray than I had intended. So I actually used white highlights to bring out some of the lighter values in it. And again, it's kind of a party theme. I think in my mind, I was thinking about, I just had a new nephew born. So I was thinking in terms of party. But actually the labeling on those little tea cakes is tea cake's birthday. They label anything birthday that has multicolored sprinkles. So that actually became the title. So that's Tea Cake's birthday.
Allison, we have a question. Your preference for a square format. Could you speak about that?
Sure. It's not a hard and fast preference. I like the square just because it has a sort of innate stability to it. Like sometimes something long and horizontal feels more landscapey, and sometimes tall has a more portrait feel. So the square feels a little bit more neutral, a little bit more stable. I'm not against working in other formats. It just seemed to kind of fit my preference at this particular time. So it's not the most eloquent answer, but that's basically what I was doing. This piece is called Rococo. It was a little bit more ambitious than some of the other pieces in terms of it being just very slightly larger, but it's a little bit more ornate. It's just talking about the curling floral patterns behind the cake that was supposed to be playing off the topping of the cake. Paintings with intricate fabric designs kind of fall into the same category as landscapes with detailed foliage, in that they're subjects that I love when other people do them, but not necessarily ones that I love doing myself. So it was a challenge for me. It was a good challenge. And then this is another wall with gouache and silver point. This first one was called Birthday Biscotti, from a gift that a friend sent me. It was actually, internally, I was thinking in terms of how the toppings on the biscotti slices, the drizzles and the toppings kind of reminded me of nature forms like sprigs of grass and seeds and nuts. And so I was trying to set up the biscotti so kind of an upward, outward feel, like grass growing. This piece I particularly like the background on, because the rainbow forms on the napkins just form a nice sort of scallop pattern to the plate and add a little bit of color. And again, that really slight nature suggestion that's really not overt. It was really more in my head, but I was kind of pleased with how that one came out. This is a drawing of cake slices that I called pillars, just playing with the architecture of the cake, especially with the layering effects of the cake. I cut the slices very narrow so that they would be a little bit unstable and kind of lean into each other, which seemed more appealing than having them sort of cold and rigid and upright. And then this last piece is called Not the Fun Kind. This cake was kind of a mess. It was this concoction of lurid colored frosting and this weird greasy cookie dough. And I wanted desperately to paint it upright so I could show the architecture of the cake. And under the studio lights, it was just turned into this melty, gooey mess and kept falling over and smearing the plate. So ultimately, that's how I painted it. It was called a Carnival Cake, and yet it was this sort of horrifying thing. So it reminded me of how when people are describing like a weird or chaotic situation, they say it's like a circus, and then they sort of add ominously, but not the fun kind. So that's how the title came about. So this was sort of a carnival, but not the fun kind. So basically that's my show and a few of the thoughts behind it. And I hope everyone enjoys it. Mike, did you want me to add anything or?
That's great. Thank you, Allison. It's a wonderful show.
Thank you.
A question did come. Were you touched by the passing of Wayne Thiebaud at 101?
Of course. I mean, he's one of my favorite artists, and you can't paint the subject matter without having him in mind. Like years ago, like he was up there in age. And I was surprised that he was still around, surprised and pleased. So he had a good run of it, but he's a definite favorite and an influence for sure.
Thank you. So now we're moving towards Fred Kaplan's exhibition. Hello, Fred. Oh, you're muted, Fred.
Okay. So hello, Mike, and hello to everybody else who's there. So this painting is called A Curious Place. And I don't think Tina or Mike knew when they hung the show, but it actually it's kind of interesting. They didn't place it inside the gallery in which most of my work is hanging. They placed it out in the hallway. It's the first thing you see of mine as you encounter my exhibit. And the reason it would be off in the direction I've taken about the last, I guess, 15 years or so. At the time, I was reading several books that were very interesting to me. One was, well, certainly one was Stephen Hawking's famous book, but also I was reading a book called Gouache or Bach by Douglas Hofstadter, in which he discusses at length the ideas of recursiveness and isomorphism. And his book is largely about how we think, how the brain operates. It's about intelligence. And I'm very interested in this idea of recursiveness, which is, he describes it as kind of those Russian dolls, one inside the other, nested parenthetical statements, with each statement referring to the one inside itself, to whatever depth you go. So that it's a kind of a landscape. Whoop, Tina's moving along. So it's kind of a landscape that is self-referential, with these sort of blocky shapes that refer to themselves, but also to other things, which is where the idea of isomorphism comes in, because he describes isomorphism as a thing is itself, but it's also other things at the same time. So again, it's kind of about how we think. And that led to the idea of using these sort of blocky forms, these prisms, I guess you might say, that now populate my work. And this piece is called, I think it's called Yes, It Rains in the Cosmos, something like that. And so a lot of my work is also references the development of the cosmos, has expanded, how it came to be into being, how we came into being, how we became what we are. This painting is, I think it's Uranus, if I'm not mistaken, is the title of this one. Uranus is the god of the heavens. And this show is about the heavens. It's called Above and Below. So it's inspired in part by above, out into the cosmos, into the heavens, as well as down into the sea. So here we're seeing the vault of the heavens, and with Uranus being master of all that inhabits the heavens. This is the seeds of time, the evolution of time, how time has become into being and has continued and expanded from an incredibly distant past into our now, and which will continue, presumably, into a very distant tomorrow. Most of these paintings you're seeing, by the way, are acrylic paintings, except A Curious Place, the first painting you saw, that sort of red landscape-ish kind of painting. The centerpiece here is Neptune, god of the seas. So Uranus and Neptune together kind of encapsulate the theme of this show, the heavens above and the sea below. To the left of it is my interpretation of Earth. Earth itself, and the name Earth, is not a god or a goddess, interestingly. All the other planets are, but Earth is not. So the equivalent god would be Gaia, or perhaps Terra. Terra is another god, the Greek and Roman gods. Thank you, Kassam. So in these paintings, one of the things I'm attempting to do is to penetrate through space. layer upon layer of space. There are solid objects, objects with dimension, with volume, but they're also largely about the space that these objects inhabit. The objects themselves are the things, by the way. One of the reasons I chose to use such kind of anonymous, generic forms is I wanted the opportunity to be able to use these forms to represent a wide array of ideas and things. And I felt I could portray things that are uncomfortable to think about or portray without making them quite so uncomfortable, quite so horrific sometimes. So we have these sort of generic shapes that on the surface are themselves, but they're also not themselves. They're also other things. This painting is titled "Black Holes Are Not Bald," which is a reference to Stephen Hawking's theory that black holes turn out to actually give off a certain amount of information or radiation, which interestingly is called Hawking radiation, after Stephen Hawking, who proposed that idea. For those who don't know, Stephen Hawking is a physicist who's now deceased. Next painting is, I wrote down the names of these. I never remember the names of my paintings. So I don't remember the name of this. I think it's a waltz, some sort of a waltz, the one on the right. The one on the left is a portrayal of Mars. And a lot of people think Mars is a god of war making. It's actually not. The Romans had a different concept. They saw Mars as a defender, a protector, who engaged in war and battle only for the purpose of defending Rome. Otherwise, he was not particularly aggressive or threatening to anybody. And that sort of metallic looking thing you see slashing across in the middle represents the sword. And this is kind of a spacey waltz. I'm sorry, I don't remember the title. Do you happen to know it, Mike, offhand, or Tina? I don't remember the title.
Not off the top of my head. Fred,
Yeah,
we do have a question for you.
Okay.
How do you plan and execute these paintings?
I start off with some kind of a thematic idea, and I'll make a few sketches on scraps of paper sometimes with just a ballpoint pen to kind of start to flesh out what I want this painting to look like. But ultimately, most of the development of the picture, how it's designed, the elements I use, how they're organized, is a process of evolution. A lot of it is not really pre-planned as such. I will lay out a kind of compositional scheme to begin, so I can draw the eye where I want the eye to go within the framework of the canvas panel. But from that point on, the painting kind of paints itself, you might say. It tells me what it wants to be, and I just listen. I do what it tells me. I'm not about to argue with it. I've tried that in the past and it never works. I always end up the loser. The painting knows what it wants to be. This piece is called Above and Below, which kind of encapsulates the theme of the show. This is an oil painting, and I used strictly traditional materials and methods to paint this. It was painted on linen prepared with rabbit skin glue, with a lead white oil ground as a foundation rather than acrylic gesso. I've used traditional, sometimes rare paints like genuine lapis, genuine vermilion, genuine Naples yellow, colors like that aren't used very much anymore. They're a little bit expensive, but I kind of like being able to use those colors. They perform differently than the modern colors do. They're ground differently. They interact with light differently and produce a different kind of a picture than more modern materials do. So this is both literally a view above and below. That large shape in the center is, on the one hand, maybe a sea creature, and on the other hand, maybe an inhabitant or an inhabitant of the cosmos itself. So we're looking up into the sky above, we're looking down into the sea below in this painting. Somebody said it looks kind of like it's underwater, and that's sort of intentional. That was part of the intent, is to give that sensation that we're actually maybe in a deep ocean. But the cosmos itself is kind of a deep ocean. It's filled with gases and liquids and plasmas in which we float around. This painting is Saturn on the left. Those shapes going crisscrossing across the canvas are suggestive of Saturn's rings. Saturn has 7 moons, or 7 major moons, I guess you might say, which those various shapes you see floating around there are representative of. The gas giant, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, have an incredible number of moons, each of them. I think one of the gas giants has in excess of 100 moons, I think, have been discovered. It's pretty astounding. And those gas giant planets are literally mostly gas, interestingly. As huge as they are, they're made mostly of nothing. So in this painting, by the way, I haven't talked about this aspect. I basically think in terms of landscape and still life mostly. And these paintings, you can see the little squares, little rectangles going across in sections of the painting, and they are suggestive of the landscape, basically. I try to bring that ideas into my paintings, even though they're essentially kind of abstract. The painting on the right is a moon of some planet. I'm sorry. I don't recall the name, the title of this, but oh, is this Luna? Help me out, Mike. I don't remember the titles of these things. I painted them a little while ago. Well, it's a moon. It's a moon. I'm sorry, I don't recall the
Sorry, Fred, I don't have your list here.
Yeah, I don't have my list here either. I should have checked this out before we did this. The painting on the right, hang on a second. This is kind of significant, so I should know the title of it. Oddly enough, I don't. I'm going to find the title of it. And that's what I'm doing right now. There we are. Okay. So that reddish painting you saw just a moment ago is Luna. It's Earth's moon. The painting we're looking at now, looking for them. There it is. Okay, it's called The Stuff We Are Made Of. The Stuff We Are Made Of. And you can see that that glowing mass at the center. As a whole, it is a supernova. The painting, that large cube, the smaller orange cube inside the large dark cube, and the small, even smaller, kind of bright cube, together are an exploding supernova. And I gave a lot of thought how to express that idea, the idea of that incredible power, that tremendous amount of energy and material that is released by supernova. The material releases, flies out into space, a lot of it landed here on Earth, and it's made us. But the real challenge was how to get that center cube to glow intensely, be blinding. And I'm not going to reveal my secrets though. And this painting is another planet. It is some planet. It is Jupiter. That painting is Jupiter.
So Fred, are you influenced by perhaps Paul Klee or others?
I have been recently. It's interesting you should bring that up. The small 12-inch paintings, the one with It Rains in the Cosmos and Seeds of Time, things like that, were strongly influenced by clay, as a matter of fact. But yeah, I'm definitely being influenced by clay and people like him. So I think you've shown us everything, Tina. Thank you.
It looks great, Fred. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Right. Well, now we're heading into my gallery. So these are my paintings. My name is Michael Kowbuz. You're not going to be able to see these too well because of the reflection. They're dark. So you might want to see them on the website. I put a link in the chat for you. So they're watercolor, they're all watercolors with India ink and gouache. I don't treat them as traditional watercolors. I consider them paintings. I don't preserve the white of the paper for light. I sort of jump into the middle and paint out to the lights and the darks. I started making watercolors as an alternative to my oil painting, which is kind of slow and picky. The watercolors are more direct and riskier. I could easily blow it, and often do, but that's the fun part, at least when it works or works out. I paint interesting subjects, things I find beautiful. Some things are obvious, like sunrises and sunsets, but I'm also drawn to offbeat things like reflections in storefront windows, sunglasses sitting on a table, exit signs at night, tunnels with encroaching trees, parking garages, expressway on-ramps, things like that. Light is usually the thing that makes these things beautiful. Early morning, dusk, nighttime, high contrast. I'm not a big fan of high noon, the noontide. I tend to dwell in the shadow spaces. My subjects are fleeting, so I photograph them. I print the photos out and make drawings from them, sometimes freehand and sometimes using a grid to transfer the image. I just print them out on copy paper and the color's bad. I usually print several gradients of contrast and then just sort of pick and choose and combine. And the photo really serves as a memory aid. But I do like photographs, actually. I mean, I like what the distortions and the weird things that happen when you photograph an image. So if it's a freehand drawing, I'll just trace it onto watercolor paper like this one. Then that frees me up for the painting part. You know, daily life and work life is busy and stressful. I sort of always in this mode of you have to get things done, you have to move forward, you have to solve problems, you have to strive, improve at all times. So I, you know, sort of in a state of hyperness and exhaustion at the same time. And, you know, it's necessary, sort of, but I'm not really built for it. I mean, I hate to admit it, but I'm a dreamy artist and I'm always looking for an opportunity to free my mind. When I used to visit John the barber, when he had a shop on 8th and Catherine, he would stop cutting hair and without saying anything, he would just walk away and stand in the doorway and gaze out. Sometimes for many minutes. And I understand the impulse. You know, I like to gaze out the window. this group here is from our bay window at home. We're lucky to have a second floor bay window in the kitchen, and it faces east and west. So I get a lot of sunsets and sunrises and in between, and lots of reflections bouncing off these things. So in contrast to daily life, I'm happy when I'm overwhelmed by a vision of something that I haven't planned or constructed in my mind, something that, just washes over me and leaves me awestruck. So that's where a lot of this comes from. It's a moment, probably a moment between moments, between doing things. It's like in between. It's just sort of there by itself, and I'm there with it, and I'm not, thinking about what needs to get done. I'm just in it with this. So then, I've got to do something with it. And, life events are there, I suppose. I mean, they're not, I guess you can't get away from biography, but it's not obvious, I guess. I mean, things that are happening are in there, whether you like it or not. So sometimes it's just a matter of like, maybe, if something's going on, this painting took longer, or, so they have special meaning to me that way, but it probably wouldn't, it's not going to register to you. I mean, places like the waterworks really enchant me because of the past is right there. I mean, you're in a spot where people have looked out for hundreds of years, and the buildings there are, it's just amazing that they're still there. And so, just sort of these sentinels on the river. Or things like, a burning hot summer and the sunset that I'm fortunate, we have a third floor window that looks out to the west, and there's this molten sun out there. I like wires and poles and housetops and satellite dishes and chimneys and peaks. I mean, I think Philadelphia has a lot to do with it. I'm originally from Canada, and coming to Philadelphia, I was just really blown away by the confluence of past and present, and the jumbling of imagery, things that are piled up on each other and reflected against one another. It was very stimulating to me. It's not at all the kind of environment I came from, which is very wooded. I mean, it's a beautiful place to grow up. But the city like this really stimulated my my imagination. So when I'm compelled to paint these visions that I have, and then I strive to recreate a semblance of their beauty in paint, and then I want to share them with you. Thank you. So now we'll move over to Lisa Hamilton's gallery. Lisa?
Hi. Yeah, I'm Lisa Hamilton. The work is in a variety of mediums. including screen print monotypes, intaglio, and pulp paintings. And pulp paintings, if you're not familiar, is a process of painting with colored pulp pigments on top of a freshly formed sheet of handmade paper that you've pulled. These particular pieces here are a combination of some screen print, that particular one. So some of the work is done, it's all done very spontaneously. Some of the work is finished quickly. Other pieces of the work are layered and developed over a period of time. These two pieces are called Chatter. I think they're Chatter 3 and Chatter 4. I was doing a series, and the forms in the pieces really have to do with thoughts, the thoughts in my head at any given time that are all competing kind of for my attention. And so I often find, even though the work begins in a spontaneous way, it does wind up being very self-reflective. Some of these are just plain watercolors. The small ones, like this one here, is just a watercolor. Titles of all of them. Thank you. Don't remember my titles either. This was a screen print monotype, and then some screen print on top of that. The screen print monotypes are done by painting onto a blank silk screen with watercolors, gouache, anything that's water soluble. And it is then pushed through the screen onto paper, so that you only get one or two, sometimes 3 impressions from the image. So sometimes they're complete in themselves, and sometimes I work back into them. So the one on the left here is, that's just a silkscreen monotype. It was done at, at one time. So there's kind of there's a lot of chance with the way I was working with these. This is a pulp painting. So there's, it's a struggle to control the medium because you're dealing with a lot of water liquid with the pulp as you're painting with it. And you're not using brushes, you're using squeeze bottles, and sometimes small syringe little things to push the pulp down. But I find that challenging and sometimes really freeing, as the medium kind of prohibits me from having absolute control over it. Whereas the next piece here, this screen print is, it was it began with a drawing and was drawn out for each of the different colors, and then of course printed. So completely kind of different approach to working in terms of control of the medium.
Lisa, we have a couple questions for you. So the first one is, how long have you been printmaking? And the second is the concept of rhythms part of your thinking?
Well, I've been making prints for, I guess about 30 years. I think that rhythm isn't something that I would necessarily be I think it comes out in the work. I'm not sure that I don't consciously think about it, but definitely energy, movement. I like trying to capture things that are in transition, that are not static, it's really fleeting, you know, moments that are fleeting, and how quickly they kind of vanish after they've begun. So that's the screen print monotype, and then some of the purple forms that you see down in that lower area were then screen printed with the through a screen on top. Most of the work of these are all screen print monotypes. A couple of them have small additions of something screen printed on top. That one has a little bit of embroidery sewing that I did inside of these little flower forms. I like and that's something that I want to maybe push a little further. I feel like there's a lot of just the color and the texture of the pulp paintings kind of lend themselves to maybe, you know, a little bit more dimensional possibilities. This particular piece, the base layer is a pulp painting, and then that kind of blue circular type form is an etching that is the plate is cut into that shape, so that it was printed, you know, as that shape with a larger you know, area around it. And the pink form is also an etching form that was printed on top. And then there's a little bit of screen print of some very translucent blues to the left of those areas. Just trying to create some push and pull with space. And these are all just pulp painting. And similar to Mike in that, you know, I do them, not all of them are successful. So, you know, it's some of them I wind up tossing or editing out later in terms of, you know, what I feel is successful works.
Lisa, everything seems very optimistic. I mean, when I walk into your room, it makes me feel good. So is that a effect you're happy to have on people?
Yeah, that it makes me happy to hear you say that. I think that all of these pieces were done on days where I was happy, which I can't say happens often. These small little watercolors, for a while I was during the pandemic, I was just waking up every morning just doing a small watercolor as a way to kind of start the day. And while the pandemic was a terrible reason to finally have time to do my artwork, I have to say that it began as a gift for me, just the time to be able to work. The pulp paintings were done right before the pandemic in the paper studio at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. They were all done, yeah, quickly with lots of, yes, with a nice color palette. So I'm glad that they make you happy, Mike. And this little watercolor is when I was on a cruise we were coming into port in Aruba. I like to do watercolors when I'm traveling. And that pulp painting is really is a waterfall. My last series of work had to do with the fish pond and waterfalls. And so that was kind of picking up on where that previous work had stopped.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a beautiful exhibition.
Thank you, Mike.
And next is the exhibition of Lydia Hamilton Brown. Lydia, you're muted. You want to unmute yourself?
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Some of you may have recalled in my past exhibitions this trip that I took to Coney Island. I like to take these little obscure trips to Coney Island, Storybook Land, all kinds of places that you might not normally go for a visit. So when I took the trip, I always travel with one of my characters. And I was on the beach and one of my characters got washed to sea. Well, when the character got washed to sea, it made me realize this is a story. This is a story that I can tell. So the first paintings that you saw were the wedding party. The character I invented is on his way with his grandmother to Coney Island to a wedding of these first two characters, the bride and the groom. And then we have the bride and the groom and the ring bearer and the bridesmaid. These are all going to be in the party. So as we move into the gallery, you'll see more of the characters that were in the part of the story. We have the rest of the wedding party, and we have the opera singer who's going to sing at the party. Each one of these characters that you see are actually created. I create these three-dimensional characters. So these are actually their portraits, I guess you would say. So there's another bridesmaid, flower girl, and then at the end is the opera singer. The opera singer will return in a few minutes. You'll see her. So what I wanted to do when I told the story, I started thinking, well, I can type this story. I started typing it on a typewriter. And the problem with the typewriter was I could hardly read it. A lot of other people couldn't read it. So I began editing it. Well, as I edited it, I brought more characters into the story. This particular character you're looking at, we're going to jump ahead a little bit. This is actually the story, the fellow that's telling the story. He's the Mystic Button Man. The Mystic Button Man went to Coney Island with his grandmother. When his grandmother got washed to sea, all these characters from Coney Island came to rescue her. So as years went by, after the wedding, after all the fun and the merriment, he went back to find them, to thank them for saving her. And they were all gone. All the characters had disappeared. The same things we looked at all the time were gone. Now you'll see there's a little opera singer. She came to the funeral. These are the mourners that went to the funeral of the Mystic Button Man. And each one of these is represented below his casket. So as we go back to the story, he went back to find the characters and they were nowhere to be found. And he decided to go on sort of a pilgrimage to find them. Years and years went by as he traveled around looking for them. He finally did find them in a very strange place called the Asylum of Slumberland. Okay, here we have the Rocket Man, the Blind Knife Thrower, the Silver Man, the Silver Giant, and on each end of the troubadours, which sang at the wedding. In the middle is Pathetico. Pathetico will now have another part of the story. So back to the Button Man, he finds these characters at Slumberland because they have all run away and found a place to hide and to live out their lives. Unfortunately, there's some sort of a crisis. I haven't described what the crisis is yet because I'm kind of saving that. So you see Electro in the brown pants, and you see Pathetico at the top. They're wearing Easter eggs on their heads so that they can gather all this electronic work that's going to come down to them. And Electro Man is going to use his electric powers to blast the Rocket Girl into space and save all of the characters. What this is actually, we have the Rocket Man there. He fell down the step to the furnace room and broke his leg, so now he's short. I know this is a little crazy, but bear with me. It seemed easier as I started typing these stories to write them actually where you could see the story and you could see the characters as well. So as you move over above the furnace room is Nails, Clowns, and the Conductor. Now, as the story is being told and this blast off occurs, the end of it is there are no known survivors. When I say there's no known survivors, that means there are survivors of this event that takes place. So this is the actual piece of work. And I wanted to include this in the exhibition to show you exactly how I work out these drawings. I sit them on my dining room table and I arrange the characters so that I can draw from the character itself. So they're not exactly, the character is made up in my mind, but the drawing is not. And that's the two-headed little lifesavers. They have a oxygen tank in there and they're going to blast off in their own little ship there. And they will survive. They're going to float down the shore. Okay, so we move over here and you have the trumpet player and we have the strong man, the dancer, and also the trombone player. And when I hung the show, Mike's comment was, well, where is his trombone? I said, well, he fell on hard times and now he's a beggar. So there's no trombone. But some of them may survive, some of them may not. So this is actually the blasting off of the Rocket Girl. And when the powers are used and all the buttons are pushed, all the characters will now jump on these rocket ships and blast into space. I took most of these down to Long Beach Island, where they floated out to sea and whatever happened, happened. So when they came back to me, the Rocket Girl was gone, the Colonel was gone, but that's where I'll start up my story again. So that's what you're seeing here. It's a long, drawn out story. It's taken me 5 years to work on. There's more of there's the Oxygen Twins, another silver giant. There's the two little that will be in that little boat that you saw. And then there's the leader of the parade. The leader of the parade had a significant part that I showed last year as he led the parade of the founding of Slumberland. The lady that was washed out to sea was Grandma. And when Grandma was washed out to sea and then came back, there was a big celebration and they built a statue toward her, which you can see up in that drawing, her statue. So it's a complicated kind of thing, but it's not. What I did then was I took on my dining room table, I took a huge sheet of paper, which is about the size of the dining room table. And I re-edited and rewrote the story. And the story actually begins with the death of the Button Man. And it begins by saying that this tragedy has struck and the mourners are lined up waiting to pay their respects to the loss of the Button Man. And then I shift to the beginning of the story. So it goes back and forth and back and forth. And I found that if you look on my website, you will clearly see this huge piece of paper. And then I typed it on the computer so that you could read it clearly. It's certainly humorous. It's meant to be humorous, but I'm sure there's a little bit of something you might get out that's serious. And unfortunately, Tina, I know she's not there, but if you lowered the top of the casket, you would see that it's all decorated with flowers and in sort of a Victorian type of motif. Oh, Mike's going to lower that for me. And there's funeral cards. Yeah, there's the top of the casket. And you can go over and you can lift up that little box. And in that box are little religious sayings that people can take with them if they want to remember the service that we had for the button man. And there's his little suitcase, or his valise, as you would call it. So the story has come to, I call it a tale. The tale of the trip to Coney Island has come to a close. However, I did sneak something in. The last trip I took was to Lakehurst, to the crash of the Hindenburg. And you will notice that the conductor is there, but his wife is not. So the conductor and his wife are going to travel on the Hindenburg. And that's going to be a whole other story as they make their way to the wedding at Coney Island. So, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, there's a question for you, Lydia. So if the pieces are sold individually, does that break up the story for you?
No, because I have more, in fact, I keep everything in a suitcase. And I have many more of these little characters. I draw them all the time, different sizes in different environments. So no, it does not in any way change the story. Plus, I still have the individual pieces. Some of them don't exist. If they died in the blast off, or they died at Slumberland, they're gone and they're destroyed.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lydia.
You're welcome.
Thank you to all the artists, and thanks to everyone for coming tonight. Are there any last questions for anybody? So Allison, we have a question for you. How often do you name the painting before it's finished, or is it always after?
It happens both ways. Sometimes I know early on exactly what I'm doing, and other times I'm thinking it through while I'm doing it, and then the name comes later. That was the case with a lot of the oils, where I was trying to feel my way through. Some of the gouache paintings I was a little more certain about early on.
Thank you.
Michael, I have a question, a quick question.
Yes.
Your images have somewhat of a lonely feeling to them, and I'm wondering if Hopper in any way influenced you.
Oh, for sure. Yes, definitely.
Okay.
So Hopper, Charles Birchfield, people like that.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Someone said they would like to see Lydia's characters floating in Fred's landscapes.
That would be interesting.
Floating in Fred's
Sure.
landscapes.
Fred's space.
We could do a collaborative work.
Yeah. All right. Well, Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
And we'll see you on the other
Happy
side.
New Year.